To me, being a Sonic fan is fun, but not for the reason you'd expect. Sure, I love playing the games, watching the movies, reading the comics, and even enjoying the fan content as much as the other guy. But what I really appreciate is meeting other Sonic fans and hearing their opinions and reasons for loving the franchise. Personally, I like to embrace this brand for the good things that it does, meaning that if Sonic achieves something grand, I'll always be there to support him. You don't really view me as someone who likes to excessively nitpick on the small things that the games do wrong because I would either not notice or not care. Obviously, I'm not saying that people are in the wrong for pointing out the flaws of whatever media they're discussing, but when it comes to this franchise in particular, I feel fans tend to take advantage of their complaints way more than they should. You can go on any social media platform including YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, and especially X, and you'll find some people that like treating this franchise like a punching bag. I could go on all day about this, but I'm sure there's not a single gamer out there that isn't aware of how this franchise often gets mistreated every now and then. Of course, there will be tons of casuals who will be truly confused as to why people, especially fans, like to proudly clown on this franchise like it's a load of nothing, and that mostly comes from how wildly inconsistent this franchise is. That's where the title of this video comes in and gives out what we'll be discussing today. Now, when I say Sonic is inconsistent, I'm not just referring to how the franchise occasionally hands out hit or miss games. There's much to it than meets the eye. Yeah, we won't just be talking about the quality of the games this time, since there's already like how many videos on that now? Instead, I want to address how inconsistent the franchise itself is, like with the characters or just the other things that fans and critics feel the need to discuss. Mainly the characterization of Sonic alongside a few other small things. While Sonic mostly has a flat character arc and hardly develops over time, if not at all, there are plenty of moments where his character is kinda or completely out of element, and not just the 2010s games. I'm talking IDW, Prime, and even Frontiers. Now, the movies do this more often than not as well, but what makes it not as bad is that the movies are their own thing and not canon with the main universe. In fact, I don't even think it's bad at all. Whereas the IDW comics and Sonic Prime are supposed to have happened in the same timeline as the game universe. Let's first address how he was in Frontiers. Now, if you ask me, I'd say Sonic's character was mostly intact for this game, like during the cutscenes where he gets more and more corrupted by the cyber energy as he does his signature grin and continues on with his task. I'm trying my absolute best to put my Frontiers bias aside for this one. One of the times where he isn't intact is in the cutscene where he first makes it to Kronos Island and comes across the End's voice as it tells him to find the Chaos Emeralds and destroy the Titans, and Sonic accepts its orders. As most of you should know, Sonic isn't one to follow orders that a stranger gives to him, which is the problem here. But here's what I think. The only thing that was on Sonic's mind at the time was his missing friends. Plus, all Sonic did was just say, sure, let's roll with this. So maybe he didn't fully accept those orders and instead just kinda shrugged it off while still keeping them in mind. And people thought he wasn't as harsh as he could have been with Sage, but I think that's due to how little he knew of her, which could explain his non-existent attitude with her. As he probably thought she was just some lost kid or something, even though it's heavily implied she wants to get rid of him. So if anything, Sage is really the one to blame here, since I'm sure if Sonic knew that she was working for Eggman, he wouldn't have been as calm and reasoning with her, if not at all. Believe it or not, there are some souls out there who claim Sonic was written worse here than any meta-era game. Yeah, I'm definitely not going on another rant of a lifetime right now. So while Sonic did sort of feel off in Frontiers, I'd say he's still a Sonic that is much more tolerable than 2010 Sonic. IDW, on the other hand, this is where things start to tip a lot more. A common gripe that people have with the IDW comics is that for the most part, Sonic is a little too soft-hearted at times. Like during the infamous moment where Sonic was trying to reason with Metal Sonic, a killing machine that was invented by his arch nemesis. Yeah, I'm not a fan of how that was played out either. It was pretty dumb. Sorry, Sonic, but I can't defend you this time. You had it coming, pal. And the whole him giving an inspiring speech seems to be a common trope from these IDW comics from time to time, which fans are not fond of, which is understandable. Even him yapping for so long is also kind of annoying. Too much of something can eventually lead to becoming a bad thing after all. Then you've got Prime Sonic, where he's just a dumbass without much reason, so yeah, not much to go off from there. The two reasons why I don't treat Movie Sonic like I do for IDW and Prime are for two reasons alone. First reason being that this isn't the Sonic you 90s and 2000s people grew up with. It's an entirely new take on him with new writers brought in to have him fit the narrative of the story. which works well given the positive reception that these movies have gotten and very much deserve. And the biggest reason that I know folks will agree with me on is that the movies aren't canon, while IDW and Prime are, which I mentioned earlier. Good luck trying to make all of this canon with this. I can probably make a full in-depth video on what I think of Movie Sonic and his characterization, but I'll let you guys decide on whether I should do that or not. If you're wondering how I'd like for Sonic to be characterized in a game or any sort of media, I'd say Unleashed and Black Knight have him at his best, which is anything but shocking. In Unleashed, when Sonic meets Chip for the first time, Chip immediately suffers from amnesia due to Sonic landing on him when he fell from space. When Sonic finds out that he was the one responsible for Chip losing his memory, he instantly offers to help the poor guy out, without another thought. Sure, the whole Chip losing his memory thing fades away after a short while given all the other engaging stuff the game has to offer, but it pops right back in during the cutscene with Sonic and Chip staring at the sunset in Adabat. Sonic almost didn't believe it to be him who got through all of what he's been through. He thought it was Chip's accomplishment, which led to him being surprised that it was his own heart all along. Even when Chip volunteers to take on Dark Gaia himself, Sonic quickly stops him and lets him know that the two of them are still the best of buddies and are both going through this together as friends. Then you've got Black Knight, where they kept all of what I said about Unleashed in mind. He doesn't view himself as a hero or any more important than any other. On top of that, he doesn't have any specific rules to follow given his carefree nature, doing things anyone sane would do, and of course is caring when the time is right. This is proven in the cutscene moments after the final boss. Sure, he's given a speech about life here, but it somehow feels a lot more organic and sincere. Which is maybe because Sonic knew that all Merlina wanted was for life to be eternal, but even he knows that should never be the case, even before their battle. What I really appreciate is that Sonic as a character in the games doesn't change or go through any sort of arc at all. Instead, he inspires other people around him to change, and by the end of their time together, they quickly grow up to be better as life goes on. Now, in a perfect world is where all of that will take place, but perfect isn't really the kind of thing I'm looking for most of the time depending on whatever it is that I'm discussing. But I do feel that if Sonic was the same from the Adventure and Dark eras, then most casual people will hardly find that interesting, which kinda hurts to admit, not gonna lie. Chances are that if Movie Sonic's characterization was literally ripped straight out of the games as the Free as the Wind character, people might find it boring. To me, it's understandable as to why people may have different feelings for how Sonic is characterized in a game that receives praise from fans, but for some reason, it's not to others. Sure, the non-gamers may not understand even with a full-on detailed explanation of it, but it obviously doesn't make them awful people for not understanding. Then at some point, whenever the issue they have is fixed, they'll immediately find something else to complain about, which leads to another discourse. See what I mean? Sonic's characterization is not even the half of it. This also includes how the majority of the cast is characterized, especially with Amy at this point in time. I already gave my thoughts on how Amy was as a character in a past video, and was met with some interesting feedback. Looking back at the video, I feel like I could have done a better job with my wording. Like me saying that Boom Amy was her best usage in the franchise. Yeah, I'll admit that was a stretch. I could have said Boom Amy was one of my favorite depictions of her, or literally anything else. So, whoops. Also, if you don't appreciate Amy's persona in Frontiers, then that's fine, but I wouldn't say she's fully out of it considering she hugs Sonic after the final boss. And there were some pieces of media Amy appeared in that I neglected to mention, like IDW and the murder of Sonic the Hedgehog. IDW is kinda interesting because from what I've gotten, they seem to have her being a leader who runs a rebellion/resistance and who playfully jokes about crushing on Sonic. Well, that's better execution than having Knuckles of all people being the commander of the resistance in forces, I'll say that much. As for Murder, this seems to mostly have her bubbly and over-the-top personality, which people appreciate, so that's fine. In fact, fans claim that all the characters are mostly intact in this game, which kinda has me intrigued to play this game someday. Maybe I will, who knows. And I can barely talk about how she was in Prime given how little her original counterpart appeared in there. Even so, I really don't want to talk about Prime. And again, I don't hate Amy in any way, nor do I think she is a bad character by any means. Some fans took it upon themselves to take most of what I said in that video out of proportion, which doesn't surprise me given the track record of this glorious fandom. So, well, now you know, I guess. Alright, but back to the main topic of this video at hand. What I'm trying to get at here is how it's not only Sonic who turns out as the inconsistent one, it's the fanbase when it comes to the writing of these characters and stuff like that. I could also talk about Shadow's characterization, but ever since the release of Shadow Generations, people like me claim that they understand what made Shadow as a character really great, so there's that. even if folks will try to argue about how he's moved on from his past and doesn't suffer from it nearly as much anymore. Seriously, Ian Flynn is just doing his job as someone that was hired by the official crewmates of Sonic Team, because I'm pretty sure the one thing that always remains on their minds, especially now, is doing what fans are requesting. Then you've got other stuff, like people who throw hissy fits about the models, artwork, canonicity, and other crap like that. The reason why for all of that can likely be answered by Sega feeling the need to fix all of that when they think it's the most appropriate. That'll for sure anger a lot of fans, but keep in mind, it's not just us as the fans that the company is trying to appeal to here. If it's what the general public desires, then the team will try their best to deliver no matter how bad the decisions they make seem to be. It isn't just your feelings that matter to the company, it's what everyone wants, and right now, most people have their ideas on what they want from these characters within their world. But just take a look at how things are in the franchise's homeland, being Japan. You'd be surprised, but Sonic is way more consistent there than he is in the US, UK, etc. That's because while Sonic can be something meant for all ages in particular, many have their own definition on who he is as a brand and character, most importantly. It's hard to believe, but Sonic isn't as popular in Japan, or at least he wasn't for a while, despite the franchise being born there and having things a little more under control than how it is in the West, which is where most of the fandom was born at. And of course where the franchise seems to take the most inspiration from. To put it simple, part of the reason why Sonic is hugely beloved around the world is because of the many inspirations the series took from Western media, but even with all that said, Sonic still remains a property that was created in Japan. Now, it's incredibly easy for Sonic to just blend in with every other video game protagonist by this point. I mean, the franchise has been around for 3+ decades by this point, so it'd be understandable for folks to start having different thoughts for a character like this. But what makes Sonic a different kind of video game icon is while your usual video game protagonists do things in the way that makes others enjoy them for it, the Blue Hedgehog does things his way, or that's how it was and should always be. While Mario games have charm and personality of their own, Sonic is much more flashy and inventive when it comes to charm, personality, and especially story. But we obviously can't forget about the simple fact that these are video games, front and foremost. Meaning that while a game can certainly have a compelling story with a positive message, how the game plays needs to own up to that as well. Even so, I'm one of those folks who simply believes that gameplay and story matter equally when it comes to this franchise, along with a few others. I mean, I don't just love Sonic Unleashed for its simple yet charming story. I also appreciate what they did with the gameplay by combining speed, combat, and platforming perfectly in my eyes. I'm gonna get off topic here again for a bit and discuss something else. I've noticed that most folks that seem to not like any of the modern media the franchise has to offer, like Frontiers, seem to be the kind of people that seem to only have Sonic be the only thing they're interested in. Sonic is nothing like Mario, Mega Man, or Crash Bandicoot, but some fans only seem to like Sonic simply because he's not like any other character who doesn't have the same type of energy that Sonic games have. What I have to say about that is simple. Folks like those need to just try to expand their interests and not just have Sonic be the only thing that makes them happy. It's not hard. I mean, just look at all the franchises I'm into aside from Sonic being one of the most important franchises to me. I'm glad this franchise isn't the only thing that keeps me feeling good in life, because it sure as hell wouldn't be healthy if that was the only thing I'm interested in. Then you got those people who actually get shocked when they find out about others not agreeing with their takes. It's not to say that they shouldn't give out their opinions, but for a franchise like this, it's best to be extra cautious with how you word things, or just not look surprised when others disregard your opinion. This is the Sonic community after all. Not saying this is a bad thing, since their hearts desire the things that give them joy, and I'm glad the franchise seems to be that way with people. Sure, it's more fun to criticize, I can sorta understand that, but that only adds to how little people can take fans like us seriously, whether their opinion is valid or not. And you ever notice how during the 2010s when this franchise has reached its lowest of lows, most of the criticism people gave actually made sense? Given how the Sonic cast was reduced to just having one personality trait per character and the stories having little to no stakes as possible. Nowadays, with the franchise in a much cleaner place, the things folks often like to criticize are things that the general public will hardly notice. And more often than not, they'll treat it like it's the end of the world. Like the art style changes or the characterization not being completely correct, just like their favorite 2000s Sonic game or whatever. And folks often like to declare that there are way more fans that spread toxic positivity more than the critical fans do, when I'd argue that the number of people who give criticism and can't handle criticism are equal. Alright, but back to the topic at hand. All I'm saying is that no matter how bad things may turn out for this franchise, Sonic is something that never escapes the minds of others. Like, if someone doesn't understand why the thing they enjoy might not appeal to another, then they can always go to us as the fans who have the brains and understand Sonic more than most people do, and maybe that could give the casuals a better understanding. Honestly, I wouldn't have it any other way, because it's hard for me to imagine a timeline where Sonic has always been consistent and is popular with the majority of the world. One could see that as a good thing, but to me, that's not really something I would want. Personally, I never really cared as much for how Sonic is characterized in a game that wants to tell a story. At least until more recently. As long as he's not how he was in any of the meta-era games, and just lives a free life and does things his way while also looking cool and caring for others while doing it, that's all I really need. Folks can really learn a thing or two from that, since they seem to dedicate their whole personalities to this franchise like their lives depend on it. Which I can understand, but to the extent of some fans I've met over the years. What really matters to me is how well the franchise as a whole does in the general public and recent years. Sonic has definitely shown that he can appeal to a number of audiences. No more of him being treated like a joke by critics or occasionally by the official social media accounts. We could really do without that. Not everybody has to view it the same way I do. Anyone is allowed to share their opinions and care for things as deep as characterization and tones of stories all they want. But most fans make it seem like they have the power to change the property when obviously we have no control over this franchise. Only Sega and Sonic Team do. Despite their rocky history, they're still a high-working company and like to strive and work hard at the end of the day, even if the results turn out hit or miss. But if fans think they know these characters more than the Guardians that own them, just let them believe what they want to believe and let them find out the answers for themselves one way or another. Now these fans got me obsessing over every small detail in the trailers and games now. Lovely. I'm gonna take a guess and assume that these kind of people are just shocked of the sudden success of the brand these days, that they only want what's best for it. And that's fine. Even with the massive amount of flaws this franchise makes at every second of its existence, it all comes down to one simple fact. Sonic's legacy is just one of those things that can never die down, because whether or not you speak of this hedgehog, he's stuck in our minds no matter what. This franchise could have like 18 billion bad games and somehow still survive from that. So at least he's consistent with that simple fact. Either way, with all this happening and the series getting even more recognition than ever before, it still leaves me with a bright smile, as pathetic as that sounds to some certain freaks out there. So yeah, I'm even more intrigued as to where this franchise will go in the future. But as usual, only time will tell.